The relentless downpour of rain in New York City mirrored the turmoil in Jack Thompson's heart as he gripped the steering wheel of the sleek black limousine. His weathered hands, calloused from years of honest labor, trembled slightly as he pulled up to the towering glass edifice that housed Blackstone Enterprises. Jack's eyes, weary but still sharp at 45, darted to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his passenger, the epitome of corporate success and ruthless ambition. Maxwell Blackstone III, CEO of Blackstone Enterprises and Jack's employer for the past decade, sat in the back seat, his perfectly tailored Armani suit a stark contrast to Jack's humble chauffeur's uniform. As the car came to a stop, Maxwell's ice-blue eyes met Jack's in the mirror, a sneer curling his lips. "Thompson," Maxwell barked, his voice dripping with disdain, "I expect you to have this car detailed immediately. I can't have my associates seeing water spots on the windows. It's embarrassing." Jack nodded silently, biting back the retort that burned on his tongue. He knew better than to argue with Maxwell Blackstone III, a man whose very name struck fear and admiration in equal measure throughout Wall Street. As Maxwell stepped out of the car, he paused, turning back to Jack with a look of pure contempt. "Oh, and Thompson? My wife needs to be picked up from her yoga class at noon. Try not to be late this time. Your incompetence is starting to wear thin." The words stung Jack like a physical blow, but he forced a polite smile. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone. I'll be there promptly." As Maxwell strode away, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement, Jack allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He closed his eyes, remembering a time when life had been kinder, when hope had burned bright in his chest like a flame. But that was before the tragedy, before the cruel twists of fate that had brought him here, to this moment of quiet humiliation. Little did Maxwell know that behind Jack's subservient demeanor lay a secret so explosive it could bring the mighty Blackstone empire crumbling to the ground. A secret that Jack had carried for years, weighing on his conscience like a millstone around his neck. As Jack maneuvered the limousine through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, his mind wandered to the fateful night 20 years ago that had set this whole tragedy in motion. He could still smell the acrid smoke, hear the screams, feel the weight of guilt pressing down on his chest. Across town, in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, Olivia Martinez sighed as she stared at the pile of unpaid bills on her kitchen table. At 28, she was a vision of beauty, with soulful brown eyes and cascading dark hair, but the weight of her struggles had left its mark in the tired lines around her eyes. Olivia glanced at the clock, realizing she was running late for her shift at Joe's Diner. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and she needed every penny to keep a roof over her head and her younger brother, Miguel, in college. As she hurried out the door, Olivia's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw it was from Jack. "Liv, we need to talk. It's about your father. Meet me at our usual spot after your shift. Jay." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Her father had disappeared when she was just a child, leaving her mother to raise two kids alone. What could Jack possibly know about him after all these years? Little did Olivia know that her life was about to become entangled in a web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that would shake the very foundations of her world. Back at Blackstone Enterprises, Maxwell strode into the boardroom, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. The meeting was about to begin, but Maxwell's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been gnawing at him lately. Mr. Blackstone, his assistant, Sarah, whispered urgently as she handed him a manila envelope. "This just arrived for you. It's marked urgent and confidential." Maxwell frowned, taking the envelope and dismissing Sarah with a wave of his hand. As he opened it, his face drained of color. Inside was a single photograph, old and faded, but unmistakable in its implications. It showed a younger version of himself, standing over a man lying motionless on the ground, a look of horror etched on Maxwell's face. With trembling hands, Maxwell turned the photo over. Written on the back in red ink were 5 words that made his blood run cold. I know what you did. As the board members droned on about quarterly projections and market share, Maxwell's mind raced. Who could have sent this? Who else knew about that night? And why now, after all these years? For the first time in decades, Maxwell Blackstone III felt the icy grip of fear closing around his heart. He had built his empire on the bones of that buried secret, and now, it seemed, someone was threatening to dig them up. As the day wore on, Jack found himself parked outside the luxurious Zenith Yoga studio, waiting for Maxwell's wife, Victoria Blackstone. The rain had finally let up, leaving the city glistening in the weak afternoon sun. Victoria emerged from the studio, her lithe figure accentuated by designer yoga wear. As she approached the car, Jack couldn't help but notice the sadness in her eyes, a stark contrast to her picture-perfect appearance. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Blackstone," Jack said politely as he opened the door for her. Victoria offered a small, genuine smile, a rarity in Jack's interactions with the Blackstone family. "Hello, Jack. How are you today?" The simple act of kindness caught Jack off guard. "I'm well, thank you for asking, Mrs. Blackstone." As they drove through the city, Victoria's gaze remained fixed on the passing scenery, her mind clearly elsewhere. After a few moments of silence, she spoke softly. "Jack, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Mrs. Blackstone." Victoria hesitated, then continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you ever felt trapped? Like you're living someone else's life?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he carefully considered his response. "I think we all feel that way sometimes, Mrs. Blackstone. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns." Victoria nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Yes, I suppose it does." The rest of the drive passed in silence, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just transpired. It seemed that beneath the glittering facade of the Blackstone family, cracks were beginning to show. As evening fell, Olivia hurried through the dimly lit streets of Brooklyn, her heart pounding with anticipation. She spotted Jack waiting for her at their usual meeting spot, a small, out-of-the-way park where they had often talked in the past. Jack looked up as she approached, his face etched with worry and something else. Was it guilt? "Jack, what's going on?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with concern. "What do you know about my father?" Jack took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Olivia's with a mix of tenderness and trepidation. "Liv, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything. Are you sure you're ready to hear it?" Olivia nodded, steeling herself for whatever revelation was coming. "I've been ready for answers my whole life, Jack. Please, tell me." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his courage. When he opened them again, they were filled with a determination Olivia had never seen before. "Your father didn't abandon you, Liv. He was murdered. And I know who did it." Olivia gasped, her world tilting on its axis. "What? How do you know this?" Jack's voice was heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. "Because I was there the night it happened. And the man responsible is Maxwell Blackstone III." As the truth of Jack's words sank in, Olivia felt as though the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Her mind reeled, trying to process the enormity of what she had just learned. But why?" she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why would he do that?" Jack's expression darkened. "It's a long and complicated story, Liv. One that goes back decades and involves more people than you could imagine. But I promise you, I'm going to help you uncover the truth and get justice for your father." As they stood there in the gathering darkness, neither Jack nor Olivia noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing the figure within, a figure whose manicured hand clutched a high-powered camera, capturing every moment of their clandestine meeting. Inside the car, Sarah, Maxwell Blackstone's seemingly loyal assistant, lowered the camera and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number, her voice low and urgent as she spoke. "It's me. We have a problem. Thompson knows everything, and he's talking to the girl. What do you want me to do?" The voice on the other end was cold and calculating. "Keep watching them. Don't intervene yet. We need to know exactly how much they know before we make our move." As Sarah hung up, her gaze returned to Jack and Olivia, still deep in conversation. The pieces of a decades-old puzzle were finally falling into place, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of New York's elite. Little did any of them know that the web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets was far more intricate than they could have ever imagined. As the night deepened, the city that never sleeps braced itself for a storm of revelations that would leave no one unscathed. In the penthouse suite of the Blackstone Tower, Maxwell paced back and forth, the incriminating photograph clutched in his trembling hand. He paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering expanse of New York City, a kingdom he had built on a foundation of deceit. His empire, his reputation, everything he had worked for was now teetering on the brink of destruction. And somewhere out there in the sprawling metropolis, the keys to his undoing were being turned. As the first drops of a new rainstorm began to patter against the windows, Maxwell Blackstone III made a decision. He would not go down without a fight. Whatever secrets were buried in the past, whatever truths were threatening to surface, he would do whatever it took to keep them hidden. Even if it meant crossing lines he had sworn never to cross again. The storm was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would change the lives of Jack, Olivia, Maxwell, and countless others forever. In the game of power and secrets, the stakes had never been higher, and the price of truth would be paid in full. The rain intensified as Jack and Olivia sought shelter under the awning of a nearby cafe. The revelations of the past hour had left Olivia reeling, her mind a whirlwind of questions and emotions. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to know everything. From the beginning." Jack nodded solemnly, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. "It all started 25 years ago," he began, his voice low and heavy with the weight of long-buried memories. "I was just a kid from the Bronx, fresh out of high school and eager to make my mark on the world. That's when I met your father, Carlos Martinez." Olivia's breath caught in her throat at the mention of her father's name. She had been so young when he disappeared, her memories of him little more than faded snapshots and the lingering scent of his aftershave. Jack continued, his gaze distant as he recalled the events of the past. "Carlos was a brilliant man, Liv. An engineer with a vision that could have changed the world. He had developed a revolutionary clean energy technology, something that could have ended our dependence on fossil fuels forever. But what does this have to do with Maxwell Blackstone?" Olivia interjected, her brow furrowed in confusion. Jack's expression darkened. "Everything. Maxwell was just starting out then, hungry for success and willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. He heard about your father's invention and saw an opportunity." As Jack delved deeper into the story, the scene shifted to a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, 25 years in the past. A younger Carlos Martinez stood before a group of potential investors, his eyes alight with passion as he explained his groundbreaking technology. Among the crowd, a youthful Maxwell Blackstone watched with keen interest, his mind already calculating the potential profits. Beside him stood Jack, then just a naive young man working as Maxwell's assistant, eager to learn the ropes of the business world. "Your father's presentation was incredible," Jack explained to Olivia. Everyone in that room knew they were witnessing something that could change the course of history. But Maxwell, he saw something else. He saw a threat to the fossil fuel empires he was courting, a disruption to the status quo that could cost his potential allies billions. Back in the present, Olivia's eyes widened with dawning comprehension. So Blackstone wanted to suppress my father's invention? Jack nodded grimly. It was more than that. He wanted to steal it, to control it, to make sure it never saw the light of day. The scene shifted once more to a lavish office in the heart of Manhattan. Maxwell Blackstone sat behind an imposing desk, his fingers steepled as he regarded Carlos Martinez with a predatory smile. Mr. Martinez, Maxwell's smooth voice oozed charm and insincerity, your invention is truly remarkable. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial sum for the exclusive rights. Carlos, his integrity unwavering, shook his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackstone, but this technology doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to the world. I won't sell it to be buried in some corporate vault. Maxwell's facade of friendliness cracked for just a moment, a flash of cold anger in his eyes. I urge you to reconsider, Mr. Martinez. The world can be a dangerous place for idealists. As Jack recounted this exchange to Olivia, her hands clenched into fists. He threatened my father? Not openly, Jack replied, his voice heavy with regret. But the implication was clear. Your father left that meeting shaken, but more determined than ever to bring his invention to the world. The narrative returned to the rain-soaked present, where Olivia struggled to process the revelations. But Jack, you said you were there the night the night he was murdered. What happened? Jack closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. It was about a month after that meeting. Your father had arranged to meet with a group of environmental activists, people who could help him bring his invention to the public without corporate interference. I overheard Maxwell talking about it on the phone, planning something. I didn't know what to do. I was young, scared. I followed them that night, thinking maybe I could warn your father. The scene shifted once more to a deserted parking garage, shrouded in shadows. Carlos Martinez hurried towards his car, a briefcase clutched tightly to his chest. From the darkness emerged two figures, Maxwell Blackstone and a hulking man with cold, dead eyes. Mr. Martinez, Maxwell's voice echoed in the empty space, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Carlos backed away, his voice firm despite his fear. This doesn't belong to you, Blackstone. It belongs to the world, and that's where it's going. What happened next was a blur of violence that would haunt Jack's nightmares for years to come. The hulking man lunged forward, grabbing for the briefcase. Carlos fought back with unexpected strength, but he was outmatched. In the struggle, Carlos was shoved, his head striking the concrete with a sickening crack. Jack, hidden behind a pillar, watched in horror as Carlos crumpled to the ground, motionless. The briefcase spilled open, papers and a small device scattering across the oil-stained floor. Maxwell's face was a mask of shock and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered, his voice shaking. No one was supposed to get hurt. But as Jack watched, that shock transformed into something else, a cold, calculated determination. Maxwell quickly gathered the scattered papers and the device, his eyes darting around the garage. We need to clean this up, he ordered his accomplice. No one can ever know about this. Do you understand? As Jack finished recounting that fateful night, Olivia's face was streaked with tears, her body shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. All these years, she whispered, I thought he had abandoned us. But he was trying to make the world better, and they killed him for it. Jack reached out, gently squeezing Olivia's shoulder. Your father was a hero, Liv. And it's time the world knew the truth. But as they sat there, united in their determination to uncover the long-buried truth, neither of them realized that they were being watched. Across the street, Sarah lowered her high-powered camera, a frown creasing her brow. She pulled out her phone once more, dialing a familiar number. "Sir," she spoke quietly into the phone, "Thompson has told the girl everything. About her father, about the night in the garage. What are your orders?" On the other end of the line, Maxwell Blackstone's voice was cold and decisive. "Find out everything they know. And then, eliminate the problem." As Sarah hung up, her gaze returned to Jack and Olivia. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Little did any of them know that the web of deceit and betrayal stretched far beyond what they could imagine, involving players they had yet to encounter. Across town, in the opulent Blackstone mansion, Victoria Blackstone sat alone in her private study, a glass of wine untouched beside her. Her fingers traced the edges of an old photograph, a group of smiling college students, their arms around each other, full of hope and promise. Her eyes lingered on two faces in particular, her own, younger and carefree, and beside her, Carlos Martinez. A single tear slid down her cheek as she remembered the man she had once loved, the man whose death had set in motion a chain of events that had led her to this gilded cage. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Come in," she called, quickly tucking the photograph into a drawer. Maxwell entered, his face a mask of concern. "Victoria, my dear, are you all right? You've been distant lately." Victoria forced a smile, years of practice allowing her to slip effortlessly into the role of the perfect wife. "Just a bit of a headache, darling. Nothing to worry about." Maxwell nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. But as he turned to leave, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Victoria," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "you know that everything I've done for us, for our family, don't you?" For a moment, Victoria saw a flicker of the man she had married, vulnerable, uncertain. But then it was gone, replaced by the hard-edged businessman she had come to know over the years. "Of course, Maxwell," she replied softly. "I know." As the door closed behind him, Victoria's smile faded. She pulled out the photograph once more, her fingers tracing the outline of Carlos's face. "Oh, Carlos," she whispered, "what have we done?" Meanwhile, in a modest apartment in Queens, Detective Michael Rodriguez sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of old case files. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his shirt rumpled from days of wear. On the wall before him was a complex web of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected by red string. At the center of this web was a photograph of Carlos Martinez, surrounded by question marks. Michael had been a rookie cop when Carlos disappeared, and the case had haunted him ever since. He had always suspected there was more to the story than a simple missing persons case, but every lead he had followed over the years had led to a dead end. Until now. His phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made his heart race. "The truth about Carlos Martinez is about to come out. Meet me at the old Parkside Diner tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Michael stared at the message, his mind racing. After all these years, could this finally be the break he had been waiting for? As he contemplated his next move, Michael was unaware that he, too, was being drawn into a dangerous game of secrets and lies. The truth about Carlos Martinez's disappearance was far more complex and far-reaching than he could have ever imagined. Back at the Blackstone Enterprises headquarters, Maxwell paced in his office, the weight of his secrets threatening to crush him. The photograph that had arrived earlier lay on his desk, a constant reminder of the past he had tried so hard to bury. A soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he barked, quickly sliding the photograph into a drawer. Sarah entered, her face a mask of professional detachment. "Mr. Blackstone, I have the information you requested." Maxwell nodded, gesturing for her to continue. Thompson and the Martinez girl know everything, Sarah reported, her voice cool and efficient. About the invention, about the night in the garage. They're planning to go public with the information. Maxwell's fist came down hard on the desk, causing Sarah to flinch. Damn it, he snarled. How could Thompson have known? He was just a kid back then, a nobody. Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. Sir, there's something else you should know. Detective Michael Rodriguez has reopened the Martinez case. He's been digging into the past, asking questions. Maxwell's face paled. Rodriguez? I thought we had taken care of him years ago. Apparently not thoroughly enough, Sarah replied. He's scheduled to meet with an informant tomorrow. We don't know who, but it could be Thompson. Maxwell sank into his chair, his mind racing. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, was on the verge of crumbling. But he hadn't come this far, hadn't done the things he'd done, to lose it all now. Sarah, he said, his voice low and dangerous, I need you to take care of this. Whatever it takes. Do you understand? Sarah nodded, a cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Perfectly, sir. Consider it done. As Sarah left the office, Maxwell turned to look out over the city he had conquered. He had clawed his way to the top, stepping on anyone who got in his way. He wasn't about to let a washed-up detective, a naive girl, and a traitorous driver bring him down. Little did Maxwell know that the forces aligning against him were stronger and more numerous than he could have ever anticipated. The truth, long buried but never forgotten, was clawing its way to the surface, and nothing, not money, not power, not even murder, would be able to stop it. As night fell over the city, Jack found himself unable to sleep, the weight of his confession to Olivia pressing heavily on his conscience. He sat at his small kitchen table, a tumbler of whiskey untouched before him as he contemplated the path that had led him to this moment. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but Jack answered anyway, his instincts on high alert. Hello, he said cautiously. Jack Thompson, a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. We have much to discuss about Carlos Martinez and Maxwell Blackstone. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? How did you get this number? Who I am is not important, the voice replied. What matters is that I have information that can bring down Blackstone and get justice for Carlos. But I need your help. Jack's mind raced. Could this be a trap? Or was this the break they had been waiting for? Why should I trust you? He demanded. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Because, the voice said softly, all distortions suddenly gone, I loved Carlos too. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the voice. Victoria? He whispered in disbelief. Meet me tomorrow at noon, Victoria Blackstone said, her voice trembling slightly. The old Parkside diner. Come alone, and tell no one. The truth is bigger than any of us imagined, Jack. And it's time for it to come out. As the line went dead, Jack sat in stunned silence. Victoria Blackstone, the wife of the man responsible for Carlos's death, was the mysterious informant. The game had changed once again, and Jack knew that the next 24 hours would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone involved in this tangled web of secrets and lies. What Jack didn't know was that his conversation had not gone unheard. In a van parked across the street, a team of Blackstone's security personnel exchanged grim looks. The leader pulled out his phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use. Sir, he said when the call connected, we have a situation. Victoria is involved. Your orders? On the other end of the line, Maxwell Blackstone closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, devoid of all emotion. Do whatever is necessary. No one can be allowed to stand in our way. Not even her. As the city slept, unaware of the forces moving in the shadows, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of power in New York. Secrets long buried were about to come to light, and the price of truth would be paid in blood. The clock was ticking, and as the sun rose on what promised to be the most important day in all their lives, none of the players in this deadly game could have predicted the shocking twists and turns that lay ahead. The truth about Carlos Martinez and the night that changed everything was finally about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. As dawn broke over the city, Olivia Martinez stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the streets below come to life. The revelations of the previous night had left her sleepless, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. She thought of her father, the man she had barely known but whose legacy now threatened to upend her entire world. She thought of her mother, who had struggled for years to keep their family afloat after Carlos's disappearance, never knowing the truth about what had happened to her husband. And she thought of Jack, the man who had carried the weight of the secret for so long. Olivia's feelings for Jack had always been complicated. He was older, world-weary in a way that both attracted and frightened her. But now, knowing the role he had played in her father's story, those feelings had become even more complex. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jack, meeting an informant at noon. Parkside Diner. Could be dangerous. Stay safe. Olivia's heart raced. She knew Jack wanted to protect her, but this was her fight too. Her father's fight. She couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. With determination in her eyes, Olivia made a decision. She would go to the diner, whether Jack wanted her there or not. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of New York City as Olivia Martinez stepped out of her apartment building. Her heart raced with a mixture of determination and fear as she hailed a taxi, the address of the Parkside Diner burning in her mind. As the cab wove through the morning traffic, Olivia's thoughts drifted to the web of secrets and lies that had ensnared her family for so long. She knew that by going to the diner, she was potentially putting herself in danger, but the need for truth outweighed her fear. Across town, Jack Thompson sat in his parked car outside the Parkside Diner, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The weight of the past 25 years pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He checked his watch, still 30 minutes until the meeting with Victoria. Jack's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why would Victoria Blackstone, of all people, reach out now? What did she know about Carlos's death? And most importantly, could he trust her? As he pondered these questions, a familiar figure caught his eye. Detective Michael Rodriguez was walking towards the diner, his weathered face set in grim determination. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Had Victoria contacted the detective as well? Inside the diner, Victoria Blackstone sat in a corner booth, her designer sunglasses and scarf doing little to hide her nervous energy. She fidgeted with the coffee cup before her, untouched and growing cold. Her eyes darted to the door every time it opened, a mixture of hope and fear crossing her face. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions for Victoria. After years of living with the guilt and knowledge of what had truly happened that fateful night, she had finally decided to come forward. But the path to redemption was fraught with danger, and she knew that by taking this step, she was potentially signing her own death warrant. As the minutes ticked by, the various players in this complex drama converged on the Parkside Diner, each unaware of the other's presence, each driven by their own motivations and secrets. Detective Rodriguez was the first to enter, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Victoria. Recognition flickered across his face, followed quickly by surprise and suspicion. He approached her table cautiously. "Mrs. Blackstone," he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from her. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she removed her sunglasses. "Detective Rodriguez," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the one who contacted you. There's something you need to know about Carlos Martinez." Before Rodriguez could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Jack Thompson walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him, Victoria and the detective, deep in conversation. As Jack approached the table, the door chimed once more. Olivia Martinez stepped into the diner, her gaze immediately locking onto the group gathered in the corner booth. A gasp escaped her lips as she recognized Victoria Blackstone. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the four individuals stared at each other, the weight of their shared history and secrets hanging heavily in the air. Then, as if a spell had been broken, they all began speaking at once. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" Jack demanded, his voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "Jack? You know Mrs. Blackstone?" Olivia asked, confusion evident in her tone. "Everyone, please," Detective Rodriguez interjected, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. "I think it's clear we all have a lot to discuss. Why don't we sit down and start from the beginning?" As they settled into the booth, an uneasy silence fell over the group. Victoria, her composure cracking, was the first to speak. "I suppose I should begin," she said, her voice trembling. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about Carlos Martinez and his disappearance." Victoria took a deep breath, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "Carlos and we were in love. Long before I met Maxwell. We were college sweethearts, working together on the clean energy project that would eventually cost him his life." Olivia gasped, her mind reeling from this revelation. "But how? Why didn't you ever say anything?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was a coward, Olivia. Because I chose security and power over love and truth. And it's a decision I've regretted every day since." As Victoria began to recount the events of the past, the scene shifted to a college laboratory 25 years earlier. A younger Victoria worked alongside Carlos Martinez, their heads bent together over a complex array of equipment. "We were so close to a breakthrough," Victoria explained, her voice tinged with nostalgia and regret. "Carlos had developed a method of harnessing clean energy that could have changed the world. But we needed funding to complete our research." The scene changed to a lavish cocktail party, where a young, ambitious Maxwell Blackstone circulated among the guests. His eyes locked onto Victoria, a predatory smile playing at his lips. "That's when Maxwell entered the picture," Victoria continued. "He was charming, powerful, and promised to fund our research. But there was a catch: he wanted the technology for himself, to control it." Back in the present, Jack leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But Carlos refused to sell out," he said. "That's why Maxwell, that's why he." Victoria nodded, a sob catching in her throat. "Carlos was idealistic, determined to share his invention with the world. Maxwell saw him as a threat. And I was caught in the middle." Detective Rodriguez, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Mrs. Blackstone, are you saying that your husband was directly responsible for Carlos Martinez's death?" Victoria's eyes met the detective's, filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "Yes, Detective. Maxwell didn't mean for Carlos to die that night, but when it happened, he covered it up. And I helped him." A collective gasp went around the table. Olivia, her face pale with shock, struggled to find words. You knew? All this time?" Victoria reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take Olivia's. "Olivia, I can't begin to ask for your forgiveness. But please believe me when I say that not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted my actions." Olivia pulled her hand away, her eyes flashing with anger and pain. How could you? Do you have any idea what your silence cost us? What it cost me? As the emotional confrontation unfolded inside the diner, none of them noticed the sleek black SUV that pulled up outside. Sarah, Maxwell's loyal assistant, stepped out, her cold eyes scanning the street before settling on the diner. She pulled out her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Sir," she said when the call connected, "we have a situation. Victoria is meeting with Thompson, the Martinez girl, and Detective Rodriguez." "Your orders?" Inside his opulent office, Maxwell Blackstone gripped his desk, his knuckles white with tension. The carefully constructed walls of his empire were crumbling around him, and he knew he had to act fast. "Take care of it, Sarah," he growled into the phone. "Whatever it takes. No loose ends." As Sarah ended the call, her hand moved to the concealed weapon at her hip. She nodded to the two men who had emerged from the SUV, their faces set in grim determination. Back inside the diner, the emotional confrontation continued. Detective Rodriguez, ever the voice of reason, tried to bring the conversation back to the facts. "Mrs. Blackstone," he said, his voice firm but compassionate, "I need you to tell us exactly what happened the night Carlos Martinez disappeared. Leave nothing out." Victoria nodded, taking a shaky breath. It was supposed to be a simple meeting. Maxwell had arranged to meet Carlos one last time to try and persuade him to sell the technology. I was there too, hoping to mediate between them. The scene shifted once more to that fateful night in the parking garage. Carlos stood defiantly before Maxwell and Victoria, clutching his briefcase containing the precious research. "Carlos, please," Victoria pleaded in the memory. "Just hear Maxwell out. We can find a compromise." But Carlos shook his head, his eyes filled with disappointment as he looked at Victoria. "There can be no compromise when it comes to the future of our planet. I thought you of all people would understand that, Victoria." Maxwell, his patience wearing thin, stepped forward. "Enough of this idealistic nonsense, Martinez. You'll sell me that technology, or I'll make sure you never work in this field again." As Victoria recounted the events, her voice broke with emotion. "It happened so fast." Maxwell lunged for the briefcase. Carlos fought back. There was a struggle, and then Carlos fell. He hit his head on the concrete. There was so much blood. Olivia, tears streaming down her face, listened in horror as Victoria described her father's final moments. Jack, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, reached out to comfort her, but she shrugged him off. What happened next? Detective Rodriguez pressed, his pen poised over his notepad. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper now. Maxwell panicked. He said we had to cover it up, that no one could ever know. He took the research, and we left Carlos there. Maxwell had his men take care of the body. A heavy silence fell over the booth as the weight of Victoria's confession sank in. Detective Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Mrs. Blackstone, you understand that by confessing to your role in covering up Carlos Martinez's death, you're implicating yourself in a serious crime?" Victoria nodded, a sad smile playing at her lips. "I know, Detective. But I can't live with this guilt any longer. Carlos deserved better. His family deserved better." She turned to Olivia, her eyes pleading. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I am so sorry." As Olivia struggled to process this flood of information, Jack suddenly tensed, his eyes fixed on something outside the diner's window. "We've got company," he said, his voice low and urgent. The others turned to look, and sure enough, Sarah and her two intimidating companions were making their way towards the diner's entrance. "We need to get out of here," Jack said, already sliding out of the booth. Now. But before they could move, the door burst open, and Sarah strode in, her cold eyes scanning the diner before settling on their group. A cruel smile played at her lips as she reached for her concealed weapon. Well, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Isn't this a lovely little reunion? I'm afraid Mr. Blackstone sends his regrets. He won't be able to join us today. Detective Rodriguez stood, his hand moving to his own weapon. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them. Sarah's laugh was cold and humorless. Oh, detective. Always so by the book. I'm afraid this situation is a bit beyond standard police procedure. As tension filled the air, the other patrons in the diner began to notice the confrontation unfolding. Panic spread through the room as people realized the gravity of the situation. In the chaos that ensued, Jack made a split-second decision. He grabbed Olivia's hand and yanked her towards the kitchen. Run, he shouted to Victoria and the detective. We'll meet at the safe house. As they burst through the kitchen doors, the sound of gunshots echoed behind them. Kitchen staff scattered in panic as Jack and Olivia weaved through the maze of stainless steel counters and sizzling grills. They emerged into a back alley, their hearts pounding in their ears. This way, Jack said, pulling Olivia towards a battered old car parked nearby. I have a place we can go, somewhere safe. As they sped away from the diner, Olivia turned to Jack, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Jack, what's going on? Where are we going? And what safe house were you talking about? Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the city streets. There's a lot I haven't told you, Olivia. A lot that I've been preparing for. I always knew this day might come, that the truth about your father might finally come out. I just never imagined it would happen like this. As they drove further from the city center, Olivia's mind raced with questions. Who was Jack Thompson really? How deep did this conspiracy go? And most importantly, would they ever be able to bring the truth about her father to light? Meanwhile, back at the diner, Detective Rodriguez and Victoria found themselves in a tense standoff with Sarah and her men. The detective's weapon was drawn, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. You're making a big mistake, Rodriguez growled, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Whatever Blackstone's paying you, it's not worth throwing your life away. Sarah's smile never wavered. Oh, detective. You have no idea what's really at stake here. This goes far beyond one man's greed or one family's tragedy. The technology that Carlos Martinez developed, it could change the balance of power in the world. And there are forces at play that will stop at nothing to control it. Victoria, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Sarah, please. This has gone on long enough. Too many lives have been destroyed already. Help us make this right. For a moment, something flickered in Sarah's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or a glimmer of conscience. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by steely resolve. I'm sorry, Victoria, she said, her voice cold. But there's no going back now. As Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, the world seemed to slow down. Detective Rodriguez, acting on instinct honed by years on the force, dove for cover, pulling Victoria with him. The sound of gunshots filled the air, mingling with the screams of terrified bystanders. In the chaos that followed, Victoria found herself being dragged towards the back of the diner by Rodriguez. We need to get out of here, he shouted over the din. Jack mentioned a safe house. Do you know where it might be? Victoria shook her head, her mind reeling from the sudden violence. I don't know, but I might be able to find out. I have access to some of Maxwell's private files. If Jack's been preparing for this, there might be a record of it somewhere. As they escaped through the back alley, the sound of police sirens filled the air. The confrontation at the diner had escalated beyond anyone's control, and now the full force of law enforcement was descending on the scene. Across town, in his palatial office, Maxwell Blackstone watched the news unfold on multiple screens. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and for the first time in decades, he felt the icy grip of fear. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "We have a situation. Initiate Protocol Omega. And find my wife. Whatever it takes." As he ended the call, Maxwell turned to look out over the city he had once ruled. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the skyscrapers. He knew that by morning, nothing would ever be the same. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would shake the very foundations of power in New York City. Secrets long buried were clawing their way to the surface, and the price of truth would be higher than anyone could have imagined. As night fell over the city, the various players in this complex drama found themselves scattered, each fighting their own battles, each racing against time to uncover the full truth about Carlos Martinez and the technology that had cost him his life. Jack and Olivia sped towards the outskirts of the city, their destination a mystery to Olivia but a beacon of hope for Jack. In the back of his mind, he knew that this safe house might be their last chance to bring the truth to light and clear Carlos's name. Detective Rodriguez and Victoria, unlikely allies thrown together by circumstance, searched desperately for clues to the safe house's location. They knew that their window of opportunity was closing fast, and that Maxwell Blackstone would stop at nothing to silence them. And somewhere in the shadows, Sarah and her team regrouped, their mission now more urgent than ever. The order had come down from the highest levels: no witnesses, no loose ends. As the city held its breath, waiting for the dawn that would bring either justice or further darkness, none of the players in this deadly game could have predicted the shocking twists and turns that lay ahead. The truth about Carlos Martinez and the revolutionary technology he had developed was about to come to light, and the consequences would shake the very foundations of power in New York City. And beyond. The old Chevy groaned as Jack Thompson navigated the winding roads leading out of the city. Beside him, Olivia Martinez sat in tense silence, her mind racing with questions she was almost afraid to ask. The events of the past few hours had turned her world upside down, revealing a past far more complex and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "Jack," Olivia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, "where exactly are we going? And how long have you been planning all of this?" Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Your father was a brilliant man, Olivia. He knew that his work could change the world, but he also knew how dangerous that made him. Before that night, he made arrangements. Fail-safes, in case anything ever happened to him." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of fail-safes?" "Insurance," Jack replied, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Your father may have been an idealist, but he wasn't naive. He knew there were powerful people who would stop at nothing to control his technology. So he created a backup plan." As they drove further into the countryside, the towering skyscrapers of New York City faded in the rearview mirror. Olivia couldn't help but feel that they were leaving behind more than just the physical city. They were driving towards a confrontation with the truth that had been buried for far too long. Meanwhile, back in the heart of the city, Detective Michael Rodriguez and Victoria Blackstone found themselves in a race against time. They had managed to escape the chaos at the diner, but they knew it was only a matter of time before Sarah and her team caught up with them. "We need to find that safe house," Rodriguez said as they hurried through the darkened streets. "It's our only chance to get ahead of this thing." Victoria nodded, her mind working furiously. "Maxwell always kept his most sensitive information in a hidden safe in our bedroom. If there's any record of Jack Thompson or this safe house, it'll be there." The detective raised an eyebrow. "You're willing to go back to your house?" Victoria, it's probably the first place they'll look for us. A determined glint appeared in Victoria's eyes. It's a risk we have to take, detective. I've lived with this guilt for 25 years. It's time I did something right. As they made their way towards the Blackstone mansion, neither of them noticed the sleek black car that pulled out of a side street, following at a discreet distance. Inside, Sarah's cold eyes never left their targets. Across town, in the opulent offices of Blackstone Enterprises, Maxwell Blackstone paced like a caged animal. The screens surrounding him flickered with news reports of the shooting at the diner, each one a nail in the coffin of the empire he had built. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Report," he barked as he answered. "Sir," came the voice of one of his security team, "we've lost track of Thompson and the Martinez girl. But we have eyes on your wife. She's with the detective, heading towards your residence." Maxwell's face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. "Stop them," he hissed. "Whatever it takes. And find Thompson. He's the key to all of this." As he ended the call, Maxwell's gaze fell on the photograph that had started this whole nightmare, the image of himself standing over Carlos Martinez's body. With a roar of frustration, he swept the contents of his desk onto the floor, years of carefully guarded secrets scattering across the expensive carpet. But as the papers settled, something caught his eye. A small, innocuous-looking flash drive had fallen from a hidden compartment in his desk. Maxwell's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it, the drive containing Carlos Martinez's original research, the key to the clean energy technology that could change the world. For a moment, Maxwell hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Then, with a decisive movement, he pocketed the drive. If his world was going to come crashing down, he was determined to have an ace up his sleeve. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Jack's car finally came to a stop in front of a modest cabin nestled in the woods. Olivia looked around, confusion evident on her face. "This is it?" she asked. "This is the safe house?" Jack nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. "Your father was a genius, Olivia. He knew that the best place to hide something valuable was somewhere no one would think to look. Come on, there's something you need to see." As they entered the cabin, Olivia gasped. What had appeared to be a simple wooden structure from the outside was revealed to be a state-of-the-art laboratory. Sleek computers lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a device unlike anything Olivia had ever seen. "Is that?" she began, her voice filled with awe. "Your father's clean energy prototype," Jack finished for her. "The culmination of his life's work. He left it here, along with all his research, hoping that one day it could be used to make the world a better place." Olivia approached the device, her hand reaching out to touch it almost reverently. "All these years," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "He never abandoned us. He was trying to protect us, to protect this." Jack placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your father was a hero, Olivia. And now, it's up to us to finish what he started." As they began to power up the laboratory's systems, neither of them noticed the small red light blinking on one of the security cameras outside. Miles away, in a nondescript van filled with surveillance equipment, one of Maxwell's team sat up straighter. "Sir," he said into his comm device, "we've got movement at the Martinez property upstate. It looks like Thompson and the girl have arrived." In his car, speeding towards the location, Maxwell Blackstone's face twisted into a triumphant grin. "Excellent. Alert the team. We end this today." Back at the Blackstone mansion, Victoria and Detective Rodriguez moved silently through the darkened halls. They had managed to slip past the initial security, but both knew it was only a matter of time before their presence was discovered. "Here," Victoria whispered, leading the detective into the master bedroom. She moved to a seemingly ordinary panel in the wall, pressing a hidden switch. The panel slid away, revealing a high-tech safe. "Do you know the combination?" Rodriguez asked, his voice tense. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she reached for the keypad. Maxwell always used the same code for his most important secrets. "The date we met." As she input the numbers, both held their breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, the safe door swung open. Inside, they found a treasure trove of documents, financial records, blackmail material, and at the very back, a file labeled Martinez Project. "This is it," Victoria breathed, pulling out the file. But as she opened it, her face fell. "It's empty." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. He must have moved the information. But where? Before Victoria could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. They froze, exchanging a look of panic. Well, came Sarah's cold voice from the doorway. "Isn't this cozy?" They turned to find Sarah and two armed men blocking their exit. Sarah's gun was trained steadily on them, her eyes glinting with malice. "I'm afraid your little scavenger hunt ends here," she said. "Now, be good and put your hands where I can see them." As Victoria and Rodriguez raised their hands, a tense standoff ensued. But Sarah had underestimated Victoria's determination. In a move that surprised everyone, including herself, Victoria suddenly lunged forward, tackling Sarah. The gun went off, the shot going wide. In the chaos that followed, Rodriguez managed to disarm one of the other men, using him as a shield against the third. "Run," he shouted to Victoria. "Find Thompson and the girl. I'll hold them off." Victoria hesitated for a split second, then nodded. As she raced down the hall, the sounds of struggle echoed behind her. She sent up a silent prayer for the detective's safety as she made her escape. Meanwhile, at the cabin in the woods, Jack and Olivia worked feverishly to bring Carlos's prototype online. The machine hummed with energy, lights flickering across its surface. "It's working," Jack said, his voice filled with excitement. "Olivia, your father's dream, it's actually working." But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The sound of vehicles approaching shattered the peace of the forest. Jack's face paled as he looked at the security monitors. "They've found us," he said grimly. "Olivia, we need to get this data out now. Your father left a failsafe, a way to broadcast all of his research to every major news outlet and scientific institution in the world. But it'll take time to upload." Olivia's eyes widened with understanding. "We need to hold them off." Jack nodded, moving to a hidden panel and pulling out two guns. He handed one to Olivia. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this, but your father prepared for every eventuality. Are you ready?" Olivia took the gun, her hand shaking slightly but her eyes filled with determination. "For my father, for the truth. I'm ready." Outside, Maxwell Blackstone stepped out of his car, flanked by a team of armed men. His face was a mask of cold fury as he surveyed the cabin. "Bring me Thompson," he ordered. "And the girl. I want them alive." As his men moved to surround the cabin, Maxwell pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "Initiate the final protocol. Wipe everything." Inside Blackstone Enterprises, a team of tech experts sprang into action, beginning the process of erasing every trace of the Martinez project from their systems. But what Maxwell didn't know was that one of those techs, a young man named Alex, had been secretly working with Jack for months. As soon as Maxwell's order came through, Alex initiated a hidden program of his own, one that would preserve and distribute the very information Blackstone was trying to destroy. Back at the cabin, the standoff had begun. Jack and Olivia had barricaded themselves inside, using the laboratory equipment as cover. Outside, Maxwell's men had taken up positions, waiting for the order to breach. "Jack Thompson." Maxwell's voice boomed through a megaphone. "You're surrounded. Come out now, and I promise you'll be treated fairly." Inside, Jack couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Fairly," he muttered. "Like Carlos was treated fairly?" Olivia, her eyes fixed on the upload progress bar on the computer screen, spoke softly. "Jack, there's something I need to know. All these years, why did you stay? Why did you keep working for the man who killed my father?" Jack's face softened as he looked at her. "Because I made a promise, Olivia. To your father, in those last moments. I promised him I'd protect you, and that one day, I'd help bring the truth to light. Staying close to Blackstone, it was the only way I could do that." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as the full weight of Jack's sacrifice hit her. "Jack, But before she could finish, the windows exploded inward as smoke grenades were launched into the cabin. The attack had begun. Outside, Maxwell watched with grim satisfaction as his men prepared to storm the cabin. But a commotion at the edge of the clearing caught his attention. To his shock, he saw Victoria stumbling out of the woods, her clothes torn and her face streaked with dirt. "Maxwell," she cried out, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and accusation. "Stop this madness. It's over!" For a moment, Maxwell's resolve wavered. The sight of his wife, the woman he had once loved more than anything in the world, brought a flood of memories and regrets. But then his face hardened once more. "You're wrong, Victoria. It's not over. Not until I say it is." As the chaos unfolded outside, Jack and Olivia fought desperately to buy time for the upload to complete. They moved through the smoke-filled cabin, trading shots with Maxwell's men who were pouring in through the windows and doors. "Olivia, the prototype!" Jack shouted over the din of gunfire. "We can't let them get it." Olivia nodded, making her way back to the center of the lab where her father's life's work stood. As she reached it, she saw the upload progress bar tick over to 100%. "It's done," she cried out triumphantly. "Jack, we did it!" But her victory was short-lived. As she turned, she found herself face to face with Maxwell Blackstone himself, his gun trained on her heart. "I'll take that," he said coldly, reaching for the prototype. But as his hand touched the machine, a burst of energy surged through it. Maxwell stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. What is this?" he gasped. Olivia stood tall, a smile of understanding spreading across her face. "It's over, Mr. Blackstone. My father's failsafe, it wasn't just about uploading the data. This machine, it's rigged to overload if anyone but family tries to move it. In about 30 seconds, it's going to release a burst of energy that'll fry every piece of electronic equipment within a mile radius." Maxwell's face paled as the implications sank in. All around them, the sounds of fighting had died down as both sides realized something was happening. "You're bluffing," Maxwell said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. "Am I?" Olivia replied calmly. "Are you willing to take that chance? To risk losing everything?" For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, Maxwell lowered his gun. "Stand down," he called out to his men, his voice hollow with defeat. "It's over." As if on cue, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Detective Rodriguez had managed to call for backup, and now the cavalry was arriving. In the aftermath, as the sun rose fully over the trees, the full story of Carlos Martinez and his revolutionary invention finally came to light. The data Jack and Olivia had uploaded spread across the globe, igniting a firestorm of interest and outrage. Maxwell Blackstone and his conspirators were taken into custody, facing a laundry list of charges that would ensure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars. Victoria, in exchange for her testimony, was granted immunity, though the weight of her guilt would be a punishment all its own. As the dust settled, Olivia found herself standing beside her father's prototype, now safely in the hands of a team of international scientists. Jack approached, a look of pride and sadness on his face. "Your father would be so proud of you, Olivia," he said softly. "You finished what he started. You brought the truth to light." Olivia turned to him, tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. "We did it together, Jack. You kept your promise to my father. And now we can start to heal." As they watched the sunrise together, both knew that while the road ahead would not be easy, they had taken the first steps towards justice and a brighter future. The legacy of Carlos Martinez would live on, not just in the clean energy technology that would change the world, but in the courage and determination of those who had fought to bring the truth to light. In the weeks and months that followed, the world watched in amazement as Carlos Martinez's clean energy technology was developed and implemented on a global scale. The impact was revolutionary, providing cheap, sustainable power to communities that had long struggled with energy poverty. Olivia found herself at the forefront of this new energy revolution, working tirelessly to ensure that her father's dream of a cleaner, more equitable world became a reality. Jack remained by her side, his years of loyalty and sacrifice finally rewarded with the chance to see Carlos's vision come to fruition. Victoria Blackstone, seeking redemption for her years of silence, established a foundation in Carlos's name, dedicated to supporting young scientists working on sustainable technologies. While she knew she could never fully atone for her role in the cover-up, she was determined to spend the rest of her life honoring Carlos's memory and furthering his vision. Detective Michael Rodriguez, hailed as a hero for his role in bringing down the Blackstone conspiracy, found a new purpose in life. He became an advocate for corporate accountability and environmental justice, using his experiences to push for stronger regulations and oversight in the energy sector. As for Maxwell Blackstone, his fall from grace was as spectacular as his rise to power had been. In a highly publicized trial that captivated the nation, the full extent of his crimes was laid bare. The man who had once stood at the pinnacle of New York's elite now faced the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars, his empire crumbling to dust around him. Sarah, Maxwell's loyal assistant turned ruthless enforcer, managed to evade capture in the immediate aftermath of the confrontation at the cabin. However, her freedom was short-lived. An international manhunt, spurred by the revelations of her involvement in the Blackstone conspiracy, eventually led to her arrest in a small town in South America. Her trial would become another chapter in the ongoing saga of corporate corruption and environmental crime. 1 year after the events at the cabin, Olivia stood on a stage in Stockholm, accepting the Nobel Prize in Physics on behalf of her father. As she looked out over the sea of faces, she saw Jack in the front row, his eyes shining with pride and something more, a love that had grown slowly but steadily over their shared struggles and triumphs. My father, Carlos Martinez, dreamed of a world where clean, sustainable energy was not a luxury, but a right. Olivia began her acceptance speech. He gave his life for that dream, but he did not die in vain. Today, we stand on the brink of a new era, one where the power of the sun, the wind, and the earth itself can be harnessed without destruction, without greed, without corruption. She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience. But this prize, this honor, does not belong to my father alone. It belongs to every person who refused to let the truth stay buried. To every whistleblower who risked everything to expose corruption. To every scientist, engineer, and dreamer who looked at our world and dared to imagine it could be better. As Olivia's words rang out, carried live to millions around the globe, the impact of Carlos Martinez's legacy continued to ripple outward. In cities across the world, new clean energy plants were coming online, powered by the technology he had pioneered. In developing nations, remote villages were lighting up for the first time, freed from dependence on costly and polluting fossil fuels. But perhaps the most profound change was not technological, but social. The Blackstone scandal had shaken the foundations of corporate power, leading to a wave of reforms and a renewed commitment to scientific integrity and environmental responsibility. As Olivia concluded her speech, she raised the Nobel medal high. "This is not an end, but a beginning. The road ahead will not be easy, but we do not walk it alone. Together, we can build the world my father envisioned, a world of clean air, clear water, and boundless energy. A world where the power to change things for the better lies not in the hands of the few, but in the hearts and minds of the many." The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very rafters of the concert hall. As Olivia stepped back from the podium, her eyes met Jack's, and in that moment, they both knew that while one chapter of their story had closed, another was just beginning. Later that evening, as they walked hand in hand through the cobblestone streets of Stockholm, Olivia and Jack paused to look up at the star-filled sky. "Your father would be so proud," Jack said softly, squeezing Olivia's hand. "Not just of the Nobel Prize, but of everything you've done to make his dream a reality." Olivia leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "Our dream now," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Jack. You kept the faith all those years, even when it seemed hopeless." Jack turned to face her, his eyes shining with emotion. "Olivia, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," he began, reaching into his pocket. "I've loved you for so long, watched you grow into this incredible, strong, brilliant woman. Will you dash?" But before he could finish, Olivia placed a finger on his lips, a mischievous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Yes," she said simply. 1,000 times, yes." As they sealed their engagement with a kiss, a shooting star streaked across the sky above them. And somewhere, they both felt, Carlos Martinez was smiling down on them, his legacy secure in the hands of those who had fought so hard to bring his dream to life. In the years that followed, Olivia and Jack's life together became a testament to the power of love, truth, and perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. They worked side by side, continuing to push the boundaries of clean energy technology while also advocating for corporate accountability and environmental justice. Their wedding, held on the grounds of the cabin that had once served as Carlos's secret laboratory, was a celebration not just of their love, but of the triumph of truth over deception, of hope over despair. Victoria, who had become a close friend and ally in the fight for a cleaner future, stood beside Olivia as her matron of honor, while Detective Rodriguez, now retired but still passionate about justice, gave Jack a hearty handshake and a warm embrace before the ceremony. As Olivia and Jack exchanged their vows beneath a canopy of solar panels that glinted in the sunlight, they were surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues from around the world, scientists, activists, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the Martinez legacy. The story of Carlos Martinez, his revolutionary invention, and the conspiracy that had nearly buried it forever became the subject of books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood film. But for those who had lived through it, who had fought and sacrificed and persevered, it was more than just a tale of corporate intrigue and scientific breakthrough. It was a reminder that one person's vision, backed by courage and integrity, could change the world. That in the face of greed and corruption, truth and justice could still prevail. And that love, in all its forms, for family, for humanity, for the planet itself, was the most powerful force of all. As the sun set on their wedding day, Olivia and Jack stood together on the porch of the cabin, looking out over the forest that had once hidden so many secrets. Now, those same trees stood as silent witnesses to a new beginning, a future bright with promise and possibility. "What do you think comes next?" Jack asked, his arm around Olivia's waist. Olivia smiled, her eyes shining with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest days of their struggle. "I think," she said softly, "that the real adventure is just beginning. And as they shared another kiss, the first stars of evening twinkling to life above them, both Olivia and Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, carrying forward the legacy of Carlos Martinez and the dream of a cleaner, brighter future for all.